In a quiet village called Bethany, surrounded by rolling hills and the distant sound of rivers flowing, there lived an old man named Ezra. He was known throughout the village as a man of deep wisdom and gentle spirit, someone who had lived a life full of both hardship and joy. His life had been marked by devotion to God and the people around him, and he knew that life was not about possessions or achievement, but about love, purpose, and faith. Matthew, a young man in his early 30s, recently moved to Bethany after years of struggling to balance his demanding career and personal life. Despite his outward success, he felt unfulfilled, like something was missing. His life seemed to revolve around his work, and he often found himself caught in the pursuit of material things, neglecting what truly mattered. Matthew had been living in Bethany for several months now, seeking peace and rest after years of striving in the city. But even in the quiet countryside, he still felt restless. He found himself waking early to work, trying to make something of his life, but no matter how much he accomplished, it always felt empty. There had to be more to life than just work, he thought. One afternoon, while walking through the village square, he encountered Ezra sitting outside his home. Ezra, the elderly man who had lived a full life of faith, service, and wisdom. The old man's gentle smile and wise eyes seemed to radiate peace, and something about his presence made Matthew feel a sense of calm he hadn't felt in years. "Come, sit with me," Ezra invited, patting the seat beside him. "I see the weight on your heart. Life can be burdensome when we chase the wrong things." Matthew sat down, surprised by how comfortable he felt. "I've been struggling, Ezra. I've been working so hard, but I feel like I'm missing something, like there's no purpose in all the things I'm trying to achieve." Ezra nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "You're not alone in feeling this way. Many people spend their lives chasing after things that ultimately do not satisfy. But there is a better way to live, a way that focuses on what truly matters." Matthew leaned forward, eager to hear more. "What do you mean? What truly matters?" Ezra stood and motioned for Matthew to follow him inside. Ezra's house was simple but inviting. At the center of his home, there sat a small, clear glass jar on a shelf. It was not an ordinary jar. This jar had been with Ezra for many years, and he often spoke of it to those who visited him. The jar had a story, a teaching, one that had been passed down to him by his father and his father before him. It was known as the Jar of Life, and it carried a deep lesson about the purpose and priorities of life. He walked to the shelf where the jar rested and carefully took it down. The jar, though simple, had an undeniable presence. "This," Ezra said, "is the Jar of Life. It holds the key to understanding the priorities of life. But first, you must understand how life is meant to be lived." Matthew looked at the jar, his curiosity growing. "How does this jar show me what I need to know?" Ezra smiled. "This jar has a lesson, but it is a lesson we must approach with humility and understanding. It teaches us how to prioritize our lives. You see, many people fill their lives with things that do not last: wealth, fame, and success. But these are like sand, easily blown away by the winds of time. The jar will show you what truly matters and how to fill your life with what is of eternal value." Ezra then began to speak softly, sharing the lesson that had been passed down to him. In life, we often struggle to balance many things: work, family, friends, and possessions. These things are important, but they must be kept in their proper place. Jesus taught us about priorities in the Gospel of Matthew. "But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you." Matthew 6:33. Our primary purpose is not to accumulate wealth or chase after earthly achievements. Our purpose is to seek God's kingdom first, to live a life of faith, love, and service. Matthew listened intently, feeling a stirring in his heart. "So what goes into the jar?" Ezra nodded and slowly began to demonstrate. He placed a few large stones in the jar, each representing one of life's highest priorities: faith, family, and service. The stones were sturdy and took up most of the space in the jar. "This is the foundation," Ezra said. "Faith in God, devotion to our family, and serving others, these are the pillars of a meaningful life. When you put these first, everything else falls into place." Matthew's heart began to soften as he understood. These were the things he had neglected in his pursuit of career and material success. But what about everything else? What about work and money and the things I want? Ezra smiled, lifting up a small pile of pebbles. "These are the smaller things in life. They are not unimportant, but they must come after the greater priorities: work, success, possessions. They are like these small pebbles. They can fill the space in our lives, but only if the larger stones are in place first." Ezra gently poured the pebbles into the jar, and they filled in the gaps between the larger stones. When you focus on the bigger things, faith, family, and service, there is still room for the smaller things. But when you focus only on the small things, you neglect the bigger picture. Jesus also said, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal." Matthew 6:19-20. Ezra paused, letting the words settle in. Then he took a small amount of sand and poured it into the jar. These are the fleeting moments, the distractions, the worries of life. They are inevitable, but if you focus on the bigger priorities, the sand will settle around the stones without overwhelming them. Matthew watched in awe as the sand filled the jar, settling into the spaces without crowding out the more important stones. "This is how life should be," Ezra said. "The jar represents your life. If you fill it first with what is truly important, faith, family, and service, then the smaller things will find their proper place. But if you fill your life with the small, fleeting things first, the larger, more meaningful things will have no room." Tears welled up in Matthew's eyes as he finally understood. For so long, he had been chasing after things that didn't satisfy, things that left him empty and restless. But now, he saw that if he put God first, if he sought his kingdom and righteousness above all else, everything else would follow in its proper place. Ezra placed the jar gently back on the shelf. "Remember, Matthew, life is not about what you accumulate or achieve. It's about who you become and how you serve others. When you seek first the kingdom of God, He will guide you, and all these things, your work, your relationships, your purpose, will fall into place according to His will." Matthew stood, overwhelmed by the clarity and peace that filled his heart. He thanked Ezra and left his cottage with a newfound sense of purpose. He knew now that his life's true priority was not in success or possessions, but in seeking God's kingdom first, loving his family, and serving others. And with that, Matthew began to live his life in a new way, filling his jar with the things that mattered most: faith, family, and service, and trusting that all the other things would fall into place, just as Jesus had promised.